Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I'd like to bring this meeting to order, please. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Budget and Finance Committee. Today is Monday, December 10th, 2018. I need to ask you to bring your conversations down, please, or take them outside. We have a very, very full agenda today. This is the last Budget and Finance Committee meeting of the year, and in Mr. Englander's case, the last Budget and Finance Committee meeting forever. So we and we do have. I'm not sure quite how that's meant, but anyway, it won't be the same without you, Mitch. We'll miss you. So we have a very busy agenda today. There's a lot to get through. This is going to go quite long. So I just want to say at the outset, please, folks, I have to not tolerate any disturbances in the meeting or distractions from our business. So we'll be taking general public comment at the end, but we'll be taking agenda item comment as we go. I also want to let City Attorney's Office know that we'll be doing our closed session at the end of the meeting, so we're going to be deferring items 1 and 2 until the end, so you will have some time. And with that, I'm going to go, yeah, I don't think we'll even need to deal with the consent items. So let's go ahead and begin first with item number 3, the FSR.
Item number 3 is a City Administrative Officer report relative to the second financial status report for fiscal year 2018-19.
Yes.
If I may,
yes.
If I can invite those of you that are not on this current item, if you want to go outside, I'm going to open up the other room. That's the overflow room. For some of the items that are not going to be heard until the end of the meeting, I'm going to open up another one.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Herman, I've already given one warning. Now I'm going to give a personal warning to you. I don't want to hear a sound from you. I don't want to hear any electronic devices, and I don't want you waving your hands or doing anything to distract from the business, or you will be removed from this room so fast your head will spin. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, members of the Budget and Finance Committee. My name is Maria Gutierrez with the City Administrative Officer. Today, we are presenting the second financial status report of the fiscal year. The second FSR is an abbreviated FSR that identifies major changes to departmental and non-departmental spending and recommends necessary transactions to ensure departments have sufficient funds to cover financial obligations pending the release of the mid-year FSR. Since the adoption of the first FSR, there are no significant changes to revenue. Our year-end overspending has decreased slightly from $91.2 million after the adoption of the first FSR actions to nearly $84 million. However, as you can see, the currently projected imbalance is still at a significant level. The projected expenditure imbalance excludes potential unbudgeted expenditures in the current fiscal year that may result from ongoing labor negotiations. Police sworn overtime continues to be a major driver of overspending. While we anticipate that the Sworn Overtime Task Force will submit a joint report with the comprehensive analysis of sworn overtime prior to the mid-year, in the absence of that report, we cannot recommend a comprehensive solution to this overspending at this time. Our reserve fund remains above the city's 5% threshold. After accounting for the recommendations in this report, the reserve fund will decrease slightly from 5.76% to 5.67%. This represents a reserve fund of approximately $351.2 million. This level continues to restrict the city's ability to rely on the reserve fund to manage the current year budget and remain above the 5% threshold. Our cumulative reserves are at 7%, or roughly $476.8 million. This is down from our first FSR estimate of 7.79%. In light of the reserve fund status, we recommend that city departments continue to manage within existing resources and work to meet budgeted revenue targets. Further, as previously recommended, should labor agreements be reached in the current fiscal year with employee bargaining groups, city departments will be required to absorb any current year fiscal impacts to the extent possible. To prepare for these impacts, city departments must consider curtailing spending at this time. Our revenue through October is approximately $63.6 million above planned receipts. This is primarily due to higher receipts in property and sales taxes, departmental receipts, and interest earnings. These surpluses offset shortfalls in utility users tax and parking fines. However, with only 4 months of revenue data, it is still too early to project year-end revenue. As you know, more than 90% of business tax receipts are received after January 1st. As far as expenditures, our year-end expenditure imbalance is largely due to the following. We have continued overspending of $43.97 million in the police department, primarily due to sworn overtime expenditures and front funding of the LA County MTA-related expenses. There's continued overspending in various accounts within the fire department, due in part to mutual aid responses that are contributing to a year-end overspending of $10.3 million. This estimate assumes that the department may be able to absorb IGT revenue shortfalls this year that are a source of funds to the department. Absent those actions, that $10.3 million could increase. There's an increase in the General Services Department's overspending from $3.8 million to $7.8, and this is largely due to newly projected overspending in the petroleum account. We will continue to work with the department to refine this number to determine those special fund-related expenditures that could be covered by special funds, so we could further reduce that estimate. Newly reported unfunded expenditures of $2.57 million attributed to the county underestimating November 2018 election costs. There's also the anticipated June 2019 special election, and there are unfunded expenses related to the Neighborhood Council Funding Program. Lastly, we continue to track $10 million that may be needed for the Ardon settlement. However, the timing of when that amount may be needed is currently unknown. As far as budget balancing solutions, the recommendations in this FSR reduce the projected year-end expenditure imbalance by approximately $11.75 million, from $83.89 million to $72.14 million. These actions include approximately $8.55 million in reserve fund loans and appropriations, mainly due to a $7.3 million reserve fund loan to the police department. We've also identified anticipated future actions totaling approximately $28.95 million, which would further reduce the year-end imbalance to $43.19 million. These future actions consist of future reimbursements to be received and anticipated transfers from the unappropriated balance. We've also identified potential future actions consisting of various departmental savings that are contingent on fiscal management efforts to be undertaken by city departments. If realized, these savings could reduce the remaining year-end imbalance to $30.54 million by the year-end. These actions that are contingent on departmental actions include $6.89 million in actions to be taken by the police department, as well as $5.76 million in savings from the Bureau of Contract Administration, the Information Technology Agency, and the Office of Finance. There are a net total of $38.38 million in recommended transactions in this FSR needed to meet our financial obligations. And this concludes my remarks. We are available to answer any questions that you may have.
Great. Thank you. Members, questions for the CAO? Mr. Kretz.
Yes, so do we know why our cannabis revenues are lower than projected?
Melissa Krantz, Office of the CAO. The cannabis revenues consist of two numbers. The first is the $30 million that was in the original budget that the mayor's office proposed. And if you use just that number, we are on target. That was using the state's estimate for protected growth in cannabis activity. There was also a $10 million ad that was occurred at during the adoption of the final budget, and that is the money that we're not seeing. And that money is in the UB.
So are we short 10 million?
We are short 10 million, but that 10 million has been set aside. Well, let me correct that. We would be short 10 million if revenue collections continue on trend. In that case, we have set aside 10 million in the UB.
Okay.
So there's no department to spend it unless it gets appropriated. It's my understanding there is a report to appropriate some of that money for cannabis department. I'm like maybe 250. Was it? I'd have to get back to you on that one. But as long as that money stays in the UB, the budget is balanced with regards to the cannabis activity.
Okay. And another question, the FSR notes that the use of petroleum is up. And why is that in the context of our efforts to reduce fossil fuel use in our fleets? How do we attribute the increased use, and how do we avoid that in the future?
Daisy Bonilla from the CAO's office.
Hello, Emily Maeda from General Services. I believe that the first FSR did not include a projection for petroleum. There wasn't data available. So the second FSR incorporates that now. It's not necessarily higher than before. Correct me if I'm...
No, you're correct.
So this is the first FSR that's reporting petroleum information as compared to the first FSR.
So it's higher than we anticipated, or is it not?
This particular account usually has over expenditures in the last 3 years. There's a lot of volatility right now with OPEC and Qatar coming out of OPEC, and we also expected some mitigation. If Prop 6 had passed, that would have lowered our expenditures, but since it didn't, currently we're monitoring the situation to see where the oil prices will stay, and that will determine where we will end up with our deficit in this account and over expenditures.
So the deficit is because of oil prices and not of increased usage by our system?
Correct. Just for comparison, in September 2017, the price for diesel was $2.48, and for September 2018, it was $3.44. So the prices are increasing, and it fluctuates. Also, the second FSR doesn't include any expenditures related to fires, so we'll continue to work with the CAO to update that information, and hopefully prices will lower, but we don't know. But it's largely due to increases.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Just as a quick follow-up to that, we have this discussion about fuel use every budget, and largely because of the volatility in price. And I think it would be helpful to get to the points that Mr. Kretz is raising if we also saw what the assumptions are about usage and how we're, in terms of gallons used, and whether we're on pace to meet or exceed or come in under those assumptions. That way we can have a better sense of monitoring usage independent of expenditure.
We can get back to you on that.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Blumenfield, did you have something else? The CAO?
Yeah, I was going to follow up on that thing.
Okay.
Cover it.
Very good. Thank you. Then that brings us, members, to our departmental roll call. Are there particular departments that anybody would like to ask questions of? Mr. Bonin, no. Mr. Blumenfield?
Clerk and transportation.
Clerk, DOT, Mr. Kretz?
No, I've asked more
Great.
questions already.
Thank you. Mr. Englander? Last chance. Last chance ever.
Really?
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. then it appears that we have questions for the clerk's office and the Department of Transportation. Everybody else, see you next year. Thank you very much for coming down. And so as they're making their way out, let's go ahead and invite up the clerk to start. Give it a second. Yeah. And if anybody else is in the back who needs a seat, there is additional room in the other room. And if you could please make your way out so that we can close the door. Mr. Spindler, I warned everybody, but since you just walked in, I will have no tolerance for disturbances. I can hear you already. If I hear you again, you'll be removed from the office, from the room. Ms. Walcott, welcome.
Good afternoon, Holly Walcott, City Clerk. How can I
Mr.
be of
Blumenfield.
service?
I just wanted to get a better understanding of the $1 million in extra cost for the county-run election, and to understand if there's any adjudication process, or is it they just, now that they're running our election, if there's cost overruns, they just tell us, or do we have some appeal, or what was that actually for?
They do their best to try and give us an accurate cost up front. However, my understanding was that the vote-by-mail costs were significantly higher than they had anticipated. They went to a new vote-by-mail system. If anybody received their ballot by mail, it was several pages long, and they also started paying for the return postage, as we have done in the past. So that's what caused the overage. They sent a letter to all the cities saying that they had significantly underestimated how much these costs were. But to answer your other question, there is no appeal process. We are stuck with what we were told.
So if they decided they wanted to do gold-plated ballots in the future and with a candy bar in each one, we're stuck paying it?
Yes, we are.
That doesn't make me comfortable, but it answers the question. Thank you.
Anything else, members, for the clerk? All right. Thank you very much. Department of Transportation, please. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Blumenfield?
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. Question, the FSR mentions the persistent vacancies in the special funds, including Prop A, Measure M, Measure R, local return. And so what I wanted to know is, what are these vacancies and what programs are actually impacted? We asked the voters to support the taxes by highlighting local return. So I want to make sure we're delivering the projects that we've promised.
Yeah, so the programs that you mentioned, it's actually the same level of vacancies that we've carried last fiscal year. So we generally will manage that using overtime or contracts whenever possible to make sure that projects are not impacted and continue to move forward. So it's not really affecting reimbursements at the end of the year.
Okay, so because it was referring to them as persistent.
Persistent.
And you're saying that's just a sort of administrative function. It's not a more substantive issue we need to be concerned about.
Correct. Yes. And this year, right now, our personnel team, we're hiring aggressively as well. In fact, Angela Baruman, the chief, is on an interview panel right now. So we do expect to, tackle those vacancies, but it's not an increase or, I just think that word is not really the most appropriate use. It's pretty standard, and we do, like I said, manage it through other means so that it doesn't impact the projects themselves.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. That brings us next to a public comment on this item. Our first speaker will be Rob Kwan, followed by Eric Previn.
Thank you. I think it's notable that our biggest overages with our budget fall with police overtime, LA Fire Department, just as we see a drop program that goes unaddressed, unsustainable. It's entirely notable that LAPD has spent $2.69 million influencing the election of our local candidates here, our current officials. I was really captivated earlier this year when we had the budget deliberations. I watched you guys on Channel 35, and it was actually nice and refreshing to see a real policy discussion. And when we got to the Ethics Commission, found out that you had previously served on the Ethics Commission. And I was really drawn to your question about how long it takes us to audit elections and how we haven't gotten any better, maybe 6 months better than we were back when you served on the commission. When we had our recession, the Ethics Commission saw their staff get more than halved. I think that's something that I really hope in the new year we can actually address so that we can audit elections in a timely manner. With our budget in general, I think the strongest way we can increase transparency, discussion of our budget, is through competitive elections where candidates actually are able to mount real campaigns and sit at the table and discuss the issues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Previn, you signed up for multiple items. Would you prefer to do 1 minute on the FSR and save your other minute for another item, or you want to just do all 2 minutes now?
Just 2 minutes today? Yeah. I'll do it in one burst if you want, because I think they're related. As long as I will not be interrupted by anybody, I'll move forward. And then we'll do general public comment later. So if you could start me from the beginning, thank you. It's Eric Previn, and I'm from Studio City. I'm on the Neighborhood Council. I'll speak partially on behalf of myself and partially on behalf of my group. First of all, the FSR, interesting. $2.5 million for election costs needs real scrutiny, because we know there's an item on your agenda tomorrow for $2.4 million to cover the cost of the CD12 special election. Now, that's just one portion of the cost. I've asked the clerk to clarify how much of the matching funds, of which there's nearly $20 million, and it's getting very close to $20 million, that you are trying to push out the door with a new campaign finance ordinance that will be beneficiary. The first beneficiaries will be the CD12 PAC, which are, and we can say congratulations to all the folks from AEG who have been down here supporting Englander for that, because those are the people who are going to pig out and get up to $340,000 in public money that's supposed to go for grassroots candidates who are all over the city frantically trying to have their voices heard in a market that is constantly facing these kinds of showboat events where there's really no opportunity for real discussion, which is why we invited Paul Kretz, who is a leader.
So, Mr. President, matching funds are not on the agenda. Let's stick to the agenda items.
Matching fund is on the FSR. It is. It absolutely is. There's nearly $20 million, sir. And the election cost is certainly on the agenda, because you tried to pretend that it's about the county sending $1 million bill, which is true. But we are planning to spend an additional 2.4, and it's more, because we'll probably spend another almost $1 million in matching funds that will go to the beneficiaries of Mr. Englander and all of his investors, including Englander, Kanabi, and Allen, who are the Motorola people who pushed through a no-bid contract that's cost us and will cost us up to $35 million additional. And the cops need the resources. He's got one on the agenda today, which is a little mistake, $2.8 million for the new computers. It's really $20 million, as you agreed in public safety and budget in a joint meeting that was held in the dark of night, as you do. So I would say show up at the Rules Committee tomorrow morning and say that we need to slow these things down and be realistic. And you, sir, and your colleagues should pay for the special election. I would appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Would appreciate it.
Our next speakers are Mr. Herman and Wayne Spindler. And again, you're signed up on the FSR, but since you have multiple items, you can take your 2 minutes now. Mr. Spindler, come on up.
So as like Mr. Paul Koretz had said, I'm not too familiar with how we spend $10 million when we're in a shortfall. I just don't understand how we can come to a crisis of $10 million. Maybe if we were fucking smart, we could maybe ask for reimbursement from every department that doesn't use the money so we don't recycle it back into our wallets the same way Jose Huizar was money laundering with the issue of development. And this has to do with oil and petroleum as well, because you can only drive in this big city with transportation niggers when you have gas in your car. See, transportation niggas like Mr. Bonner is real cool, sits back right there talking about policies and patterns, and yet he doesn't want to discuss the fucking audit on the reimbursement, nigga. What's wrong with you, bro? What's wrong with you? We got road diets, road cunt diets and all kinds of bitches in the streets having to appropriate funds for motherfuckers to drive. But we're talking about petroleum and oil as the cause of a $10 million fucking dollar deficit. No, nigga. This is about paying outside counsel to fucking do Paul Krikorian's dirty work with those fucking dirty Armenians for $600 to $800 an hour. I want the FBI in there to do an audit and an investigation of why tax-paying dollars of $10 million have been money laundering into schemes, scams, and shenanigans throughout this fucking city with Eric Garcetti running around downtown with a cock up his ass. Why is that goddamn mayor not working for us people, y'all?
On the agenda
I'm
today.
on the goddamn $10 million reimbursement. Fuck you and Tamar, you fucking Armenian, and those other two fucking stupid Jews.
So, to the members of the public who are here, this is a regular event for us here in the Budget and Finance Committee, and so I just want to apologize to all of you who are here, who, of course, find offense in the disgusting comments that you just heard. So I apologize to everyone who comes down here and has to be subjected to that. This is what happens in City Hall these days. So I apologize to everyone who's here. Mr. Spindler.
Okay. I understand that when number one, we got 40 toys, was a city Los Angeles nigger. Police rise incident for police department. They beat 30 toys. They think 30 toys nigger. So police department beat shit out of him. Now we settle a lawsuit. This happened where? They do not say. Where this happened? It happened near the subway station, where Mike Bannon called everybody transportation nigger. So no to number one. Number two, Jeffrey Martin, is a traffic accident called Chatsworth Street and Krabs. That is over there to Mitchell Englander District. Mitchell Englander is a fucking faggot! And I say no to number two, because he no good and the people at LA City no good.
Don't yell into our microphone.
Now, city administrative officer, and that would be Miguel Santana, he a fucking faggot! And I say no to these asshole report.
Last warning. I don't want you yelling in our microphone. You'll be removed.
I try to talk. Number three, asshole. Now, I talk number four, cocksucker two. A budget finance recommendation regarding unappropriated stolen money. Stolen money, FBI want to know where $2.1 million go. They answer Jose Weezer had the $2.8 million in offshore account over there in Cayman Island. Asshole nigger. Number five, Marriott Hotel and LA Live cannot afford to spend time at Marriott Hotel. No good, no good. So finally, there is something in this budget that Mitchell Englander has wanted to say for many, many years about the budget. My budget's a fucking faggot!
Mr. Spindler and Mr. Herman will be removed from the room. Mr. Spindler for yelling into the microphone for the third time, and Mr. Herman for playing electronic devices. They're disrupting the meeting. Please leave the room quietly and silently. Please leave the room silently and quietly. Okay, Mr. Spindler and Mr. Herman are both defying my lawful order. Remove them from the room. Remove them from the room with dispatch, please. And while they're being removed, again, to the members of the public who are here, I'm very apologetic that you have to be subjected to this. This is a show that they put on at every single meeting, and I apologize to those of you who are actually trying to participate in the public process and coming and being able to speak to your elected officials. You shouldn't be subjected to that. So my apologies to all of you. All right. Members, if there's anything else on the FSR, if not, it would be my recommendation to approve the CAO's recommendations. If there's no objection, that will be the action of the committee. All right, that brings us to item number 4, and Mr. Previn, you already spoke on your items. So, members, this is the, well, go ahead and introduce item number 4, please.
Item number 4 is a report from the Los Angeles Police Department relative to responding to fiscal year 2018-19 adopted budget recommendation regarding a technology spending plan detailing how $2.8 million in unappropriated balance will be used. On December 5th, 2018, the Public Safety Committee approved this matter.
All right. So, members, my recommendation would be to concur in the Public Safety Committee's recommendations. Is there any need for a report or discussion about it? Okay. Seeing none, it will be the action of the committee to, by unanimous vote, to concur in the Public Safety Committee's recommendations. And while we're at it, item number 9, members, I would have proposed as a consent item, and yeah, I have no speakers on that one, so unless there's questions or concerns on item number 9, seeing none, it will be the action of the committee to approve the CAO's recommendations. That brings us then to item number 5.
Item number 5 is the Chief Legislative Analyst Report relative to the Anschutz Entertainment Group proposal concerning expansion of the Los Angeles Convention Center and the JW Marriott Hotel at LA Live. On December 13th, 2018, the Economic Development Committee approved this matter.
All right. So I'd like to invite the CLA up to report on this matter. And then we have quite a number of speakers who want to speak after the CLA. Mr. Wickham, welcome.
Good afternoon. John Wickham with the Office of the Chief Legislative Analyst. Before you is a report concerning expansion of the Los Angeles Convention Center and the JW Marriott Hotel, which is across the street. The city has been looking at expansion proposals, ideas, concepts for the convention center for about the last 8 years. We started with the Farmers Field project, and then that morphed into seeking a solution through the city's development capacities. And basically, for the life of the convention center, really, we've only looked at solutions that dealt with the convention center in terms of building it bigger and bigger. And over the last few years, as we've gone through the analysis of what the convention center really needs, our solutions have been more moving toward dealing with everything together as a holistic package, kind of a stool approach. So we need to deal with the facility itself and the services that it provides, deal with the management of the facility, and deal with the hotel rooms that actually provide service to the facility. And so what you've been seeing over the last few years is trying to find a way to deal with all of these individual components, and a report actually in front of you deals with all 3 components at the same time. So what you have is a recommendation to explore an exclusive negotiating agreement with AEG to pursue an expansion of the convention center. This will provide a facility that has over 1 million square feet in exhibit and meeting room space that will bring the convention center up into a top-tier convention center in terms of facilities. The proposal is to actually pursue this as a P3, a public-private partnership, in the DBFOM model: design, build, finance, operate, and maintain. So at the end of the day, the concept would be that we would be dealing with not only the construction, the finance, but also the operations and the maintenance as well. So this would be a long-term solution for the facility to deal with the facilities and the operations issues. And then the third part is a recommendation concerning the expansion of the existing JW Marriott Hotel. So AEG has proposed to build a second tower, connecting that to the existing tower, and that would have 850 new rooms. There would also be expanded ballroom and meeting room space in the facility. All of this would be connected by a bridge across Chickern Court to the convention center. So the JW Marriott would be linked directly into the Los Angeles Convention Center. As we discussed a couple weeks ago, the city has been pursuing the goal of achieving 8,000 hotel rooms within walking distance of the convention center. Approval of this project and construction of this project would actually bring us up to that 8,000 room number. And so we have in our report recommendations to enter into the ENA with AEG to pursue the DBFOM model. instructions for CLA and CAO and Tourism Department to pursue the definitive agreements, really put that deal together for you. We also have recommendations to enter a memorandum of understanding with AEG to pursue definitive documents for the incentive for the hotel. And then we have a recommendation to evaluate that goal of 8,000 rooms and come back to you with a report on evaluating whether the effectiveness of that program, whether there's any additional need, or whether the program can be put to bed. And then finally, because this is a P3, a DBFOM, and there is very little experience on city staff side in dealing with the legal and the policy issues associated with such a complex deal structure. And in particular, there's very little experience with P3s for convention centers in particular. City staff, City Attorney's Office, Bureau of Engineering, CAO, CLA request funding to bring consultants who specialize in these areas to help with the negotiations through this process. In particular, on the convention center, we have a building, the West Hall, that was built in the 1970s. We have a building, the South Hall, that was built in the 1990s, and we're proposing to put a new building in between the two and link them together. And so in that process, in that design process, we need to make sure that we address all of the ADA accessibility issues associated with bringing all of that facility into alignment. We need to address earthquake conditions to make sure that the building is safe. And we need to negotiate a maintenance program that takes into account the old and the new and bringing that all together. So it's a very complex deal that we need to negotiate. And city staff feel that it would be appropriate to bring in consultants to help us with that. And so with that very brief overview, there are a lot of details. We can answer any questions for you. City Attorney is here, CAO, Bureau of Engineering, Convention Tourism Department, as well as the Tourism and Convention Board, and our consultants who help do the fiscal analysis on the hotel incentive are here as well. AEG and Plenary are here as well if you have any questions for anybody on the team.
Okay. Maybe before we dive into that, now that we've heard the report, if I could take some of the public speakers, and then we'll come back to questions and comments that you all may have. That'll give you a little chance to take your notes. So let's go ahead and hear from Irene Lewis, followed by Diana Yadoyan, followed by Ron Miller.
Irene Lewis, Director of the Red Shield Youth and Community Center in Pico Union. We are located just 4 blocks west of LA Live. I'm here to speak in favor of the expansion and of the JW Marriott Hotel. I've been at the Red Shield for 28 years, and when I first got there was a lot of crime, a lot of issues. But with the construction of the Staples Center that provide jobs, opportunities, and the commitment of AEG to improve the quality of life of the neighborhoods surrounding their location has made an incredible difference in the lives of the families we serve, especially in the children, and their commitment to the local schools to provide mentors and a reading program. They are a very philanthropic organization, and one that would not have improved the quality of life in the surrounding areas of AEG. So I'm much in favor of this and hope that you would consider that.
Thank you. Ms. Yadoyan, followed by Mr. Miller, followed by Ryan Hallenberg. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, council members. Diana Yadoyan, Senior Manager of Public Policy with the LA Area Chamber of Commerce. I'm here to speak in support of this project. I know the City of Los Angeles, as the CLA just said, has made it an effort and a goal in reaching that 8,000 room walking distance from the convention center in order to be more competitive with cities like Los Angeles as a convention city. And the fact that this project brings us to that 8,000 goal is amazing. It creates thousands of jobs, both in construction and in longer term entertainment service industry. I'll keep my comments short. It's a great project, and we absolutely support it and can't wait to see the final project.
Great. Thank you. Our next speaker is Ron Miller, followed by Ryan Hallenberg, followed by Ann Orchier.
Good afternoon. I'm Ron Miller, Executive Secretary of the LA Orange County Building Trades, and I'll echo the previous speaker's comments. My local union is right down there by LA Live, and before LA Live was put in there, you couldn't walk down the street at night. Now it's a nice, safe place. They've did a good job of creating local jobs in the past, and we plan to create local jobs in the future. And it's really a gem of the city. People, when you mention LA Live around the state, people know where it's at. But the truth is we're losing large conventions to cities like Sacramento, cities like Reno. And we're working on the hotel rooms. We're almost there. We can get those large conventions and help drive the local economy of the city. So we support this project wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hallenberg, followed by Ann Orchier, followed by Johnny Coleman. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Ryan Hollenberg with the Valley Industry and Commerce Association, otherwise known as VICA, representing the business community in the San Fernando Valley. VICA strongly supports moving forward with the Los Angeles Convention Center expansion and the concurrent JW Marriott expansion. These projects will attract visitors and businesses to the city of Los Angeles, driving economic growth across the region. Financial assistance would come entirely from new revenue and is necessary to close the funding gap identified by the city's independent consultant. The project will generate long-term revenue growth for the city's general fund, benefiting all Angelenos. The hotel expansion is a crucial part of the city's goal of 8,000 hotel rooms within walking distance of the convention center, and investment in these projects will create and sustain thousands of high-quality construction and permanent jobs. The inclusion of a community benefits agreement provides benefits such as a living wage, local hiring, and disadvantaged business outreach. VICA urges you to approve the matter and move forward with this exciting project for Los Angeles. Thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you. Our next speaker is Ann Orchier, followed by Johnny Coleman, followed by Michael Shillstone. Good afternoon.
Hi, I'm Ann. I'm with No Olympics LA and the Democratic Socialists of America, Los Angeles. And I just wanted to comment that I'm really disheartened and disappointed to hear about this project spoken with such urgency when we are in a housing and homelessness crisis and not a hotel shortage crisis. This should not be a priority or goal for our city. We know, regardless of any other potential benefits that this may or may not have, we know that these 850 hotel rooms are not going to provide housing to any Angelenos who need it. And to hear any of you talk about how we can't wait any longer to do this and talk about spending this much money and give these many subsidies to hotel developers when I almost never hear that urgency spoken about, low-income housing developments and things that Angelenos actually need. This is a zero-sum game. We don't have infinite resources. We don't have infinite energy, and this should not be a priority.
Thank you. Next speaker is Johnny Coleman, followed by Michael Shillstone, followed by Ellen Riotto.
Hi there. Johnny Coleman, also with the Democratic Socialists of America, LA, and the Olympics, LA. To piggyback what Ann just said, I just want to talk about the people who are pushing this project, which would be the developers and the people sitting in front of me. The only people who are going to benefit from this project are the politicians and developers, and they're playing games with our lives. Whether it's developers, people like Jeff Bezos, who's pushing the Amazon project in Virginia and New York, or the International Olympic Committee, setting the terms for our city. These are outside corporate interests. City officials often like to talk about giving handouts to developers like they're hurting for funding and access, when we know that they're the wealthiest and most powerful people in the world in this case. AEG currently owns almost all of this downtown sports and tourism complex, from the Staples Center, LA Live, the Lakers, the Kings. They're a monopoly. They're not a charity case. It's really sickening to hear city officials and others refer to these incentives as, quote, financial aid, when our public school system and the children who rely on it are in crisis. Thanks, sir.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker is Michael Shillstone, followed by Ellen Riotto.
Good afternoon. I'm Michael Shillstone with Central City Association. We are strongly supportive of this partnership between AEG and the city to expand the convention center and the JW Marriott Hotel at LA Live. The Convention Center expansion and the addition of hotel rooms adjacent to the Convention Center would make Los Angeles among the most competitive destinations for convention activities in the country and bolster our tourism industry, a cornerstone of the city's economy. It would create thousands of new jobs, provide much-needed open space, and deliver several community benefits. It would also strengthen downtown as a hub of activity for upcoming major events, including the 2022 Super Bowl, 2026 World Cup, and 2028 Summer Olympics. Finally, it would generate hundreds of millions of dollars in net new city revenues, an order of magnitude that few, if any, other development projects in the city could yield. We urge you to support the motions before you today, which will allow both the expansion of the LA Convention Center and the JW Marriott Hotel. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Riotto, welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Ellen Riotto. I'm the Executive Director of the South Park Business Improvement District in downtown LA. Thanks for the opportunity to provide comment this afternoon. The South Park BID has been providing clean and safe and economic development services to 52 blocks of downtown, including the Los Angeles Convention Center, since 2005. In that time, we've seen our neighborhood evolve from parking lots and warehouses to a vibrant residential community and business community, as well as an internationally recognized hub for sports, arts, and entertainment. We consider the Los Angeles Convention Center a key component of that ongoing growth. If approved, the expansions before us today will bring LA closer to our shared vision for the future, with a facility that can compete with the top convention centers in the United States and the hotel rooms to support these conventions. Both AEG and the Department of Tourism and Convention Development have been great partners in South Park, and from the perspective of our stakeholders, this expansion is greatly needed. We look forward to continuing to work with AEG, the Convention Center, and the city to maximize the benefits of this expansion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Was there anybody else that wanted to speak on this matter? Because that was all the cards I had. All right, come on up.
Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity. I am Mary Hewitt, the Executive Director of the Los Angeles County Alliance for Boys and Girls Clubs, and I'm very proud to say that AEG has had a very rich history with workforce development and engagement and integration with our youth, from teen summits to a trip to China for our kids to understand companies out of China based here in Los Angeles. A lot of growth and opportunity with this new expansion that we're excited about and we're in fully support. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Sir, welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Nate Nussbaum. I'm with California Hospital Medical Center, part of Dignity Health, and we are by far the oldest institution in the South Park Business District. We've been there for over 132 years, and I will tell you without a doubt that AEG, in sponsoring and their partner organization, the Marriott, have been a terrific partner. They are an anchor institution in providing economic stimulus for the area, but also they are phenomenal partners in supporting all of our nonprofit organizations. They're a part of our social fabric. We cannot say enough things in support of them. We hope that you will consider this motion and it will move forward. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Is there anybody else? Okay, then I'd like to ask Mr. Wickham to come on back up. And actually, could I have the Convention Center and LA Tourism come on up too if you're, Mr. Liu, do you want to just, Mr. Wickham, first of all, if you could just kind of review process for us a little bit. If the council approves these recommendations, what are the next steps? What are the next votes that will need to be taken? What happens in dealing with if AG proposes or rejects the project, decides to go a different direction? Just kind of walk us through what's ahead of us.
Okay. So the ENA outlines a process for the negotiations. It actually includes in the attachments some preliminary drawings that have been prepared by Populous. Just so to give you a little bit of background, AEG has retained Populous architects to design the project. It so happens that the city selected Populous in a competitive bid process previously to do this project, and then before that even, AEG and the city selected Populous to design the convention center expansion for the Farmers Field project. So we have an architecture firm that has spent 8 years evaluating the convention center and understanding exactly what the city needs, what the city wants for its facility. In the ENA, we have detailed descriptions of all of the elements that we need to have in the design of the convention center. So we have a very strong design document moving forward. AEG will immediately initiate the schematic designs plus some additional more detailed design process so that we will know before we even get to the end of the day and come back to you that we have a design that suits the city's needs, that suits the needs of the convention center and the city at large. One of the consultants that we aim to hire would have experience working with convention organizers so that we can actually test the design in the market to confirm that our clients, our prospective clients, have a facility that they can use. So we need to make sure that what is built in at the end of the day is a process to get feedback from the community, review all of the design elements that we need in our facility so that when you get a final design at the end of the day, you're actually seeing something that's been thoroughly vetted. And so that's what we'll be doing over the next year in terms of the technical parts of the design, in terms of the aesthetic parts of the design, and as well as the finance plan.
Okay. Ms. So?
It just to point out, too, at the end of the day, all of this must come back to the council for approval. The hotel ENA as structured is a non-binding document. We would have to come back with those definitive documents for the council to approve.
Great.
In addition to that, with regard to the exclusive negotiating agreement that is before you, while it is not a binding document, there is a commitment in there as it relates to if there is not a deal at the end of the day. In other words, if the financials don't work out and the city and the developer do not enter into an agreement, there may be an obligation for the city to pay up to $4 million. But if that does happen, essentially the schematic design documents that John referenced would become city property, and we would only pay in the case of there is not a deal and those design documents are retained by the city.
Okay. And so we would retain the intellectual property of that design to do with as we see fit, and you have some ballpark of what the estimated value of that work would be?
The $4 million.
Okay. All right. And then if the city were to proceed with AEG as the operator, what period of time would that be before we could consider a different model? Would there be some period of time after which we could, put it out for a new RFP or bring it in-house or proceed in some different fashion?
I think that is something that we're going to have to discuss with our partners at the convention center. They did extend the management agreement by 1 year for the purposes of this additional discussion that we would have. So I'm looking at Doan to see if he wants to add to that.
We've just done a 1-year extension, but I wanted to add that the structure of the DBFOM is such that the management agreement is part of that O for operating, and that's all factored into the what we'll end up doing the definitive documents at the end. So it's potentially going to be a very long-term agreement.
Okay. Can any of you speak a little bit to? We've had a long goal of a room number goal for downtown, and we've also had a goal of having a renewed, redesigned convention center, and the argument has always been that we need those two things together in order to attract national conventions, the so-called citywide conventions that we are not competitive for right now compared with many other cities that we're attempting to compete with. So can maybe each of you talk a little bit about the value of that? Why is that important to the city, and can you quantify it in any way in terms of its impacts on the city and its revenues?
Want to go?
Yes, I can speak to that. Patty McJennet, Los Angeles Tourism and Convention Board. As the organization that is responsible for booking citywide into the convention center. We have done a number of customer surveys over time, and without question, the two things that have always come up as impediments to our ability to book has been lack of hotel rooms, and secondly, lack of contiguous space at the convention center. And that has been true for over the last number of years, and it continues to be, particularly as we've seen so much modernization, futurization of other convention centers that are competitors of ours. So we actually just had a customer advisory board meeting in town, and they again reconfirmed what the biggest obstacles have been. We do a lost business report, and we estimate that that we're losing about $1 billion in lost business in terms of economic impact. If we go back over the last 4 years, it's about 271 pieces of business, which translates to $750 million in room nights, and then of course that also has an implication of loss of TOT
So
over time.
$750 million just in hotel expenditures for the room nights?
Room nights,
Okay.
yeah, revenues. And then, of course, that translates directly to the TOT.
Right.
But we have, and to your guys' credit, you guys have worked to, really grow the number of hotel rooms downtown, and that is already, we see, have a positive impact. So if we're able to, move this across the finish line and to actually have a convention center that will continue to be competitive, more than competitive, will be a premier center, it will make a huge difference in our ability to sell that convention center going forward.
Okay. Mr. Liu, anything to add to
As far as the hotel rooms, the goal has always been 8,000 hotel rooms, and this will get us closer to that. But as a comparison, today, both Anaheim and San Diego are in excess of 10,000 hotel rooms. San Diego's are actually attached to their convention center, and San Francisco has upwards of 22,000 hotel rooms within walking distance. So even our 8,000 number goal is probably inadequate by the time we expand the convention center.
So, and in light of that fact, one of the recommendations that's before us today is to reassess whether that goal continues to be valid, whether there's a different goal, what our status is in meeting the old goal, and what the prospects are for meeting any future goal. That's all part of what we'll hopefully be moving forward with at least that recommendation. Okay, and a couple of other things, and then I'll open it up to members. First of all, Mr. Wickham, you mentioned in your opening comments that the city needed to bring in outside expertise specific to P3s for convention centers. I just want to make sure that we're clear. There's no city in America that has the expertise on P3s for convention centers, right? I mean, this is a new concept, and so this is not something where we are lacking. It's that they're outside of the private sector. There isn't the existing in-house expertise of any city. This is a new concept.
Exactly. It's our understanding that this had been attempted in Miami, and that failed. And so we definitely need to have the assistance to do that type of analysis, and it's clearly not something that's an in-house service that we can provide.
Right. Okay. Now, a few members of the public who were speaking earlier mentioned that housing as an issue, and of course it is a significant issue. Can you speak a little bit to how this project relates to our need to bring in more housing? And specifically, if the hotel and convention project did not go forward, what would likely be other options for this property? And, within the market, what would those options be, and what would the city need to do to be able to achieve those options? So
currently, hotels in the Los Angeles area are in an occupancy range of 80 to 90%. Some areas are pushing beyond 90%. So anybody coming to Los Angeles is having difficulty finding some place to stay. And so other options, I think the tourism board often says that, one of the number one places for people to stay is somebody's couch, right? So that translates into short-term rentals. Now, I think it would be helpful to have and interesting to see some data on the impact of the lack of hotel rooms in creating a bigger market in short-term rentals, which clearly results in fewer housing units available for the population that's already living here. So I think that's one area. The other issue that we have is that if we can't put people, have people stay in hotels in downtown Los Angeles to go to the convention center, they're obligated to go to Santa Monica or Beverly Hills or Pasadena or Glendale. And that means that we have to provide transportation to bring them to the convention center, right? So that turns into a transportation issue. It turns into, an environmental issue of having all those additional travel miles that we're putting on the roads for the businesses coming to the city. There are no resources going into this deal that would otherwise be used for housing. All of the property that is being set aside for this project is currently convention center property or a parking lot that is under control of AEG for it's actually called out to potentially be a convention serving purpose. So all of the land use assigned to this has been set for convention purposes. And there had been some proposals or some thoughts to have housing built on the convention center property. And there were concerns from members of the council that that was not an appropriate use. The convention center is an active facility, throughout the day, throughout the course of the night. And we have trucks delivering massive exhibits in the middle of the night. You have, this kind of activity going on all hours of the day. To bring in housing and overlay that onto these very active uses might be a conflict that would create difficulties for the operation of the facility and for the well-being of any residents that might be living there.
Okay, Ms. Hill.
And just to add on to that, so under this arrangement, in terms of the revenue that would be generated off this project, the hotel project itself, it's anticipated based on our consultant study that it would generate about $600 million over the course of the 25-year period, of which a portion of it would be provided back to the developer as part of the feasibility gap. However, the rest of it would be general fund revenues. And those general fund revenues would be at the discretion of the electeds on how to expend. So to the extent that you chose to expend any of those revenues for housing, it could actually be devoted to housing. So that would be one way of addressing that matter. So in terms of the dollar amount, if I remember correctly, and I'm looking for KMA, our consultants, but I believe that of the $600 million in nominal amounts, it would be about $160 million to the developer, but the $440 million would be accruing to the city. And it's also important to note that after that term, that all of the revenues, all of the annual revenues from this project will be remitted to the city.
Okay. So if the hotel project were not financially feasible and it was not otherwise incentivized, then what would be the outcome in terms of the city's revenues and the use of the property?
Well, as John indicated, there was discussion at one time. Remember that this is an existing parking lot right now. So it's not generating a whole lot of parking tax revenues right now to the general fund. In terms of other uses, whether it's for good convention center use, there was also talk at one time of using it for office space. Now, office space, there's a lot of office space in downtown LA, and whether that's going to generate the same amount of general fund revenue as a hotel project, I would guess that a hotel project would generate hundreds of millions of dollars more in general fund revenues compared to an office.
Direct revenues, without regard to the economic vitality that comes from having the larger convention.
Correct, because most of that additional revenue that's being generated is actually TOT. TOT is almost 80% of that amount.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Englander? Mr. Bloomfield?
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate all the good work that's been done and is being done on this. And a lot of times on these subventions, I've got a critical eye, and always like to have a critical eye. This one is easier than a lot of them, in my view, because of the tremendous need for the convention center and the fact that we have a very clear stated goal as a city of what we need and how to incentivize that. So I'm pleased about that. I wanted to ask a little bit about how the old convention center, the expansion, the hotel are going to operate together, and how the financing and management agreements will be structured to avoid any incentive to steer meetings and events to different parts of the unified complex. Because as I understand, we have different, as a city, different financial benefits and costs depending on where different events are within the unified complex. Is that an issue? And if so, how do we address it?
The Tourism and Convention Board does the booking for the convention center facility, and they work very closely with all of the local hotels in doing room blocks for use of the hotel rooms as well as any ancillary meeting room or ballroom space. A lot of conventions will have events outside of the main convention activity, and they will use local ballroom and meeting room space as part of that. So the Tourism Board is actually bringing in, when they talk to a hotel, a bigger package of use for the facility, which is always very helpful. And they are booking 5 years, 6 years, 8 years out in advance. So well in advance of when a hotel might be looking for to book some of their space. But I'd actually, maybe Patty has more to say on this subject that would be helpful.
Yes, when we're presenting to the meeting planner, the thing they want to know most and foremost is obviously the number of hotel rooms, but also that the space is going to work for them. That, and I mentioned earlier the importance of the contiguous space, which I know you guys are aware of. But when you look at particularly convention centers like Anaheim, just modernized, San Francisco just modernized, San Diego is having those conversations. We need to sell the whole package. So yes, it is the convention center, yes, it is the hotels, but it's the availability of event venues around in proximity to the area. So really, it's the customer who is deciding where events are going to go based on what their needs are. If they need a theater location, if they need, more of a festival kind of location, they are the ones who are actually selecting the venues in and around their convention. Does that give you perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, and maybe it's not as big of an issue as it could be. It just struck me as a concern in the sense that we have different motives for different parts of this unified structure, and receive different taxes from it, and that could be, and a lot of it is very similar, especially when you have these giant rooms. But if we're booking our convention space so many years in advance, maybe it's not an issue. I just wanted to throw that out there to see if that was an issue or it was something that we needed to control for. Maybe it's not.
The other thing to note is that the way these deals are structured, well, two things. As Patty said, they're booked so far out in advance that our incentive agreements actually reserve room blocks at the hotels. So if it's 10 years out, 80% of the hotel rooms have to remain available to Tourism Board to sell for conventions. And that number comes down as you get closer in years. The other thing to note is that we rely on the TOT revenue when we look at the event revenue and expenses. And so it almost works out that the convention center is deeply discounted if they agree to book a certain amount of rooms, because we'll take that revenue projection and discount it against the actual room rate or the rack rate at the convention center. So we take both revenues in the calculation. So there really isn't that conflict that you're referring to, because we look at the overall revenue, both convention center revenue and TOT revenue.
in terms of the benefit for the
Right.
for the city.
So when they book, we put them both together and add them together.
And then on a sort of positive note question, I mean, asking about the reporting that we do, if this hotel or any other, for that matter, that we deal with generates more TOT revenue than we anticipated, the benefit gets paid down quicker, right?
Correct.
Which is great. And I know that that's happened in the past, and I always feel like that never gets enough attention. You know, we should be trumpeting that when that does happen. So, you know, it seems like that often gets hidden. And so how do we make sure that that's part of the equation and that is known not just here but beyond, you know, when these things are succeeding in that regard, and which I hope will happen with this one as well.
Yeah.
So that was actually somewhat addressed in our last report 2 weeks ago, where we talked about the annual reporting that will be done. We're going to be doing enhanced annual reporting as it relates to each one of these deals. And so that will be certainly one of the things that will be highlighted on a go-forward basis relative to whether they are, if in a successful project, that the incentive will have been paid off earlier, but then that also benefits the city because that means all of the revenues then are accruing to the city thereafter. So that will be one of the things that will be included in our future annual reports, working in conjunction with the CAO, reviewing each one of these incentive type agreements and giving status reports to the council. It's also required under state law on some of these on these type of agreements where there is additional disclosure requirements. So we will be reporting on that. It's a long-winded way of saying we'll be reporting on it.
and yes, it's a good thing when it happens. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kretz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wonder if you could give us a couple examples of conventions that we currently aren't able to get because our convention center isn't large enough, but that we would hope to be able to attract otherwise.
There's a number of examples. But one that sticks out is we just booked the American Association of Cancer Research for 2025 and 2028, based on the fact that we'll have an expanded convention center. They've never been able to attend, to hold their convention here in Los Angeles, even though they do Stand Up for Cancer, for instance, and are have a lot of activity in Los Angeles, and a lot of their board members and association members are based here in Los Angeles. So they've always had to be in Chicago, in Las Vegas, or in Orlando. And so once we got word out that this was a possibility, they reserved 25 and 28. They're looking at 23 as well. There are a number of large medical associations and tech corporations that have never been able to look at Los Angeles that will open up. As Patty said, over 271 missed opportunities in the last 6 years.
Our design guidelines actually have a requirement to be able to attract at least 95% of the convention business out there. We're in the 80s at this point. So we're significantly expanding the pool of conventions that we could even qualify to bid for. So that we're basically trying to go for just about everything.
Are there conventions that are more public-oriented rather than the more insular, like a Comic-Con type that we ultimately don't attract because of our size?
Well, the ones that we focus on are the ones who are going to use, that have less local attendance and are going to have the maximum number of overnight visitors staying in hotels. So like Comic-Con, I don't think it's ever going to leave San Diego, honestly, but they have a huge, also large local attraction, and but they're out of night stays. A lot of them are from Southern California. So that particular convention, there's a lot of Angelinos that are already there. So that one's in a little category, I think, by itself. But the pharmaceutical, the medical conventions, the tech conventions that Doan was mentioning are conventions that are very lucrative for the city. They tend to spend a lot when they're here. They have very, high-level events. And so those are ones that really we try and bring in, and currently just have not had the scale of facilities to get them here. So
The goal is to bring in as many people from as far away as possible to stay in our hotels, visit our restaurants, and the tourism board is working hard to get them to extend their stay. So they might be coming for a 3-day convention, but they stay for 3 days or 4 days or 5 days. So we get that extra added benefit in the economy, and we help bolster the hospitality and tourism industry in the city, which is such a big part of our economy.
And presumably with such substantial subsidies being given to some of these hotels, we obviously want them to treat their employees well. How do we interact in terms of whether the hotels are required to be union or to at least have card check neutrality? Do we have agreements in that direction?
Yes, we do have agreements, requirements for those kinds of agreements in our community benefits plans for each of these incentive programs. So that's required there. And of course, the council passed the hotel minimum wage ordinance a couple of years ago to ensure that there are quality wages available in this industry as well. So between those two parts, we have assurances that, and then we're also beefing up our enforcement in that area by requesting the BCA, Bureau of Contract Administration, evaluate and monitor all of those requirements.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kress. Mr. Bonin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to my colleagues for the questions. I find these deals to be among the most annoying and frustrating things that come before us, because I never think that they're talked about right or honestly. On one hand, it's talked about as a horrible giveaway to wealthy corporations, and on the other hand, it's talked about like the silver bullet, holy grail way to grow and save the economy in Los Angeles. And it's a lot murkier than that. And I mean, to me, it's one of like countless uncertain rolls of the die we do to try to generate revenue to run a big city in an uncertain economy. I think it's really in the middle of all of that. I wish we lived in a democratic socialist society, but we don't. So absent that, I've got to try to find ways in a capitalist society to squeeze money out of the system to pay for ways to mitigate a capitalist society or do good things otherwise. So I would prefer the system was a lot different, but given this is the system that we have, there needs to be things in Los Angeles that generates revenue that we can tax so we can pay for firefighters or fixing our sidewalks or rapid rehousing vouchers for people who are living on the streets homeless. So we need to do that. One of the questions is whether or not this is the best way to do it. It's probably not one of the ones that I would think of first, but it's before us. So, but it also concerns me because I think I'm already hearing the creep of the sort of the mission creep of it. It was 8,000 hotel rooms, and in the last 2 meetings we've had, it's, maybe we need 10,000 hotel rooms. It's always, well, they didn't choose us because of the hotel rooms, when, maybe they didn't choose us because we got 50,000 people living in tents on our streets, and that's not what they want their visitors to spend their tourist dollars among. So I'm not sure I believe all of the foundational stuff, but what I'm sort of struck by on this is, one, we talk about, on one hand, the most ridiculous terminology ever, subvention agreement, which is just ridiculous, obscure government terminology.
Subvention is not the correct, accurate word.
Well, good.
There is no subvention of any taxes.
It's a stupid word anyway. So
every taxpayer is obligated to pay everything that they are obligated to pay, and we collect everything that they're obligated to pay.
And that's the other side. On the other side, it's referred to constantly as a subsidy. And the way I hear this is not as a subsidy, but as a revenue sharing agreement. Is that, Sharon, accurate?
It is a revenue sharing, but it's also an incentive, because we're incentivizing the development. This is a hotel development that would be a complementary use to our convention center that would support our convention center. So in that sense, we are providing an incentive to support that use. We would, if it was a different use, we likely may not subsidize it, because if it's not supportive to the convention center or provide a public use, then we would not be incentivizing it.
I understand that. That's not the argument that pulls me in, because there may be much more important things to incentivize or subsidize in the city of Los Angeles than more hotel rooms. What I'm intrigued by on this is that regardless of what's incentivized, we have the ability to get hundreds of millions more in TOT revenue for the general fund that can help us pay for a number of good things that we want to do.
Yes, and that does support the idea of incentivizing, because there is a revenue sharing between the developer and the city. So general fund revenues are being created, substantial general fund revenues would be created absent this project. There may not be that same type of revenue generated, and we are sharing that amount with the developer. So yes, it is a revenue sharing, revenue participation.
For a limited period of time, and then we don't share.
That is correct. And after, well, we believe that actually 11 years after the hotel opens, that all revenue will be accruing to the city.
And when we discussed this more broadly in committee a couple weeks ago, I had asked if the gap between their investment and the return on their investment isn't as big as they're saying, if they're BSing us, do we get our money back? And what you explained to me is that exchange never happens.
We don't pay up front.
That we don't pay up front.
It comes only after they have built the project and are generating revenue to the city. So this is a significant difference in economic development activity. I mean, a lot of CRA stuff, for example, those were loans or those were grants that were done up front, right? So you were taking the risk that you were even going to get a project. That risk is off the table. We don't provide anything unless it's built.
Right.
And if I could just add one more thing, Councilman. As part of the MOU, there is also going to be a construction true-up as part of this arrangement. So if, for example, the estimated construction costs are not as high as anticipated based on the evaluation done by our consultants, then yes, the subsidy could be reduced. And that audit of the construction costs will be paid by the developer, but the consultant will be our consultant. So there is going to be that true-up. So the subsidy, yes, could indeed be reduced.
So you're saying subsidy?
Well, it's a hotel incentive.
So it's, but I'm really trying to sort of understand how this works. What you're saying is that if the true-up shows the construction wasn't as expensive, we share less revenue with them.
That is correct.
Okay. All right. So today, and whenever this goes to council, what are we voting on and what still needs to come back to us? Does the actual deal, the terms, need to come back to us for final approval?
The terms for the incentive agreement are in front of you in the memorandum of understanding with AEG. And that outlines the definitive documents that we're going to go forward. It indicates the amount of the incentive that's provided. It has a requirement for a community benefits package. It has a requirement for a room block agreement for both the convention center as well as the Olympics. And it has a requirement for ADA accessibility review. There are a number of terms in the MOU that we will now go negotiate with the developer.
What do we still need to give final approval to at a later date?
Once that document is completed, we'll bring that forward again for consideration by the council. And that we probably won't be doing that until we have the convention center ENA completed as well, right? So it'll all come together as one final thing. And
so we're telling you to continue to work on this, but we're not giving we're not flipping the switch.
What you're approving are the general terms.
Okay.
The final documents that really implement this are still discretionary approvals for the council to make at a future date.
Yes.
This lays out the general idea of what the structure will be, but all of the final documents would have to come back to you. We still have to figure out a financing plan for this. That's something that is going to be, a major consideration for you to consider when this comes back. So there's going to be additional documents that we will still need to negotiate. This provides, as I said, just the structure of what the terms will be. It is not the final structure. It's not the complete structure.
And a last question, and my apologies, because I'm almost certain I asked this 2 weeks ago, and I don't have enough RAM in my head to remember it, is do we have the ability for these agreements to say, we will only do this if you're doing a project that is LEED Gold or uses solar and recycled water and provides electric shuttles and stuff like that? In a time where we may not be leaving an environment for our kids and grandkids, do we have the ability to make that part of the deal?
I think that there are some provisions for that. I'm not sure if engineering is here, but there could be provisions included if that is a desire of this committee to include environmental concerns as part of the design. We can certainly look into that for that to come back as part of the definitive documents and how some of that maybe move forward. So if that is a desire of the committee, we can certainly look into that as
Mr.
part
Craig,
of
would you like to join me in that? It's a very Koretzian idea.
Sure. When we had gone through the competitive bid process for an architect for the convention center, the architectural teams had actually identified a number of very creative concepts dealing with water, wastewater, energy. So at an absolute minimum, we would be able to go back and look at those and see if there are systems that could be incorporated into the convention center design that makes sense.
It comes to council. It's not council tomorrow, right?
It's Wednesday.
Yeah, so let me know before then.
We can take a look at the design document that is attached, and we'll go through it and see if there are environmental type elements, and we'll point those out to you before.
Curious about the operational as well,
yes.
like electric shuttles.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bonnet. I want to follow up with Mr. Bonnet's points about the true-up and what happens. We're making decisions based on certain assumptions. How do we look back retrospectively and see whether those assumptions were valid, the financial assumptions in particular? And this might sound facetious or at least leading. It's really not meant to be. I want you to speak as much as you need to about this. But we're talking about, we're projecting forward decades and making a decision based on really critical infrastructure for the city, based on financial assumptions about room rates and occupancy rates and construction costs and environmental sustainability elements and all sorts of other things, labor costs that figure into this. It's all complicated. There's a lot in that algorithm to come out the other end. To what extent are we relying on the good faith of AEG in making that decision? In other words, talk a little bit about what we do or have done or will do to test those assumptions and to have a degree of confidence that, in fact, what we're hearing about feasibility and projected income and projected revenues is in fact true.
So I'd like to invite Kevin Engstrom with Kaiser Marston Associates up. They prepared the consultant analysis for us, and they are actually contracted to do one of the true-ups on a different project, and so they might have some insight for you on the question you just asked.
Great. Thank you.
Well, with regards to your questions and the incentives for AEG, I mean, AEG is an enterprise that's looking to maximize revenue. And the way that they're going to maximize revenue is by providing a quality product at a quality location. And one of the requirements of this agreement and most agreements that cities enter into with these developers and with hotel developers in particular is ensuring that quality standards are going to be met. And, we're going to be, this is a AAA 5-diamond property. So it's an extremely high level quality that's going to have to be maintained in terms of both the service as well as the physical nature of the property. So those are some of the things that are out there that ensure that the city's position is protected and that the revenues being generated by this hotel are going to be at or above commensurate properties both in downtown and within the Los Angeles region.
Okay. And in terms of the so-called feasibility gap, the Comptroller's Office was here a few weeks ago giving a report about past agreements that we've had with some hotels, and one of the comments that was included in that report was the notion that there are different types of models to determine whether there is a feasibility gap. There are different approaches that one can take in analyzing whether a project is feasible. So what did you do in terms, did you just rely on one model, or how did you determine whether or not there was a real feasibility gap?
Our practice with these agreements for the City of Los Angeles is really a threefold analysis. As we look at something that we call the return on costs, which is generally based on cap rates plus a reasonable kind of developer profit on that. We also did a profit or conducted a profit margin analysis where we looked at the underlying cap rate and identified what a typical developer might expect to receive in terms of the profit margin on a high-rise, multi-level, high-quality hotel. And then finally, we also did a dynamic analysis, which is called an internal rate of return analysis, and looked at the IRR that was generated by the project. So based on those three analyses, essentially what we do is we rely on the return on cost analysis, and we look at the other two to corroborate the findings of the return on cost analysis. And that's pretty much our standard practice.
And so under all three of those models, you determined that there was in fact a feasibility gap, and all three models revealed a comparable gap.
Exactly. And that was, the findings were ultimately that the feasibility gap was all within a range of like $5 to $10 million or thereabouts, maybe even a little bit less for the three different models.
Okay. So in doing that analysis and in determining what input to put into that modeling, let's say cost of construction. Did you rely on AEG's estimate of cost of construction, or did you rely on your own independent knowledge base and comparative costs in other hotel projects?
It's twofold. AEG provides data for us to review based on their bids that they've received from their contracting firms. We then compare those figures to other projects that we've seen built and developed in the region that we've reviewed of similar quality and kind of scope. We also have offices in LA. We have obviously LA, but we also have offices in San Francisco and San Diego. So we look at what's going on there to ensure that the costs are within the range of what we deem to be reliable. And then as John and Sharon mentioned earlier, there is going to be the true-up to ensure that the costs that have been provided were reasonable, rational, and supported by current conditions.
Okay. And similarly, when it comes to assumptions about room rates and occupancy rates, did you rely on what AEG was telling you, or did you rely on your own independent expertise in the hotel industry?
It's twofold, really. We look at the information provided by the developer. The developer also provides a market study that was conducted by another consultant firm, and then we look at the underlying performance of the market to ensure that the projections, both on the occupancy and the ADR, are reasonable.
Okay. And in terms of the return on investment, did you just rely on what AEG said they wanted to get as their return on investment, or did you look at what is typical in the marketplace and in generating a developer's interest in a hotel project as opposed to, say, a luxury condominium project or a shopping mall or some other use of the land?
No, as you noted, I mean, all product type are going to have different return requirements, and there's even different return requirements in hotels depending on the quality level, with select service might having a slightly higher return requirement than a full service high quality hotel. So what we do is we look at the underlying market conditions, we look at published data sources, and based on those published data sources and our understanding of the market, we arrive at what we believe to be a reasonable return on costs. Now, discussions or negotiations might occur with the developer to identify whether or not they believe that's supported. We ultimately rely on numbers that we fundamentally believe are fair and accurate given the current market conditions.
Okay, great. Anything else on that from the CLA?
Just the only other thing I would add is in the KMA report, while they identified a feasibility gap of roughly $115 million, that the incentive that is being provided will be less than the feasibility gap. And so I think it's in the neighborhood of about $97 million.
Okay. And so that margin will need to be made up by a changed rate of return or some other, AEG is going to have to figure that part out.
They will have to make a business decision, yes.
Okay. And then lastly, since we mentioned the controller's report and some retrospective look we've taken at some of these other arrangements over the years, can you talk a little bit about how this proposal compares to other incentive agreements that the city has entered into? In what ways is it similar? In what ways is it improved upon? Any comments like that you'd like to offer?
I may turn this over to John, but in terms of the annual reporting that we talked about, that will actually be required. The true-up, absolutely required. Some of the prior deals, it was a discretionary thing that we didn't have to go through with it. But in this particular instance, it will be required. There is another provision in there that relates to the clawback that we talked about. So in this particular MOU, that if there is, the pro forma anticipates that the developer will be assessing a destination fee in which TOT is calculated. If for any reason that destination fee is ever stopped, there would be a reassessment of the revenue generated from that to ensure that we remain in sync, and that if necessary, that the incentive amount could be reduced if by chance that destination fee were to go away in the future. So that's a new provision that's included in this particular MOU that didn't exist in prior ones. And I'll ask John if he has any more.
And I guess my response is a little bit broader, that the conversation that you have had over the last 2 weeks and the conversation that the council has had over the last few years on these types of incentive agreements have helped your CLA and your city staff understand better how staff reports can be more transparent. And so what you've seen is that the staff reporting has been more comprehensive in each of these detailed areas. And so we've been working harder to ensure that the full scope of information as required under the Big If policy, going back to '96, the Big If policy actually had a whole list of criteria that needed to be addressed in any analysis. And so we are making sure that we are going back and touching all of those criteria under the policy in our staff reports so that you have the full body of information available. And we are constantly learning, and we are constantly ensuring that the reports to you have more information to help you in the decision that you have in front of you.
Okay. Mr. Blumenfield, thank you.
Maybe a little bit of a side issue, but when you mentioned the destination fee, which as a policy thing, I hate those resort fees. I think it's anti-consumer. I would love to ban them in LA or have the state ban them, because they're not optional. It's not really a fee in that regard. But if that were to happen and consumers were to revolt against those fees, couldn't they just fold that into the room rate and not have to make it and it wouldn't affect our financials? Because it's like a
I suppose that could be possible, but I would leave that to the developer to decide whether, because if the room rate gets so high, then it could affect occupancy. With a destination fee, there are additional amenities that are being provided, and I guess it's really a matter of whether those are the kind of amenities that you would enjoy versus somebody else. So I don't have a really good answer to that, but I agree with you that sometimes those are surprise charges that occur on hotel bills that I'm not also happy with.
But my point is, I think we could, even though I see that that's a potential loss of revenue if consumers rise up and if someone does, but I don't think that would necessarily cost us on this deal, because I think there's other ways to recoup that.
It would be incumbent upon the hotel operator to actually increase the rates to make that recovery then.
Not increase rates, just be more transparent about it.
All right, members, anything else on this? Any other questions, concerns? The recommendations are before us, and with the addition that Mr. Bonin asked for a report back on sustainability measures that can be integrated into this. I don't think there was anything else that we added to the recommendations. So is there any objection with moving forward with the recommendations with Mr. Bonin's addition? Seeing none, it will be the action of the committee to approve the recommendations. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to item number 6.
I'm going to try to ask a couple relevant questions.
I see. I guess that's a good. All right, folks, we still have quite a bit more work to do, so if I could ask you to please be a little quiet as you exit the room. Thank you very much for coming down.
Item number 6 is CEO reports in response to motion Buscaino, Bloomfield, and Martinez relative to a pilot program to employ homeless individuals for the Loose Litter Cleanup Program. On October 16, 2018, the Energy, Climate Change, and Environmental Justice Committee approved the matter, and on November 14, 2018, the Public Works and Gang Reduction Committee approved the matter as amended.
All right, thank you very much. And I do want to note that Mr. Buscaino is here as well. Mr. Buscaino, welcome. Do you want to open up, Mr. Buscaino, or do you want to have a brief report before we begin?
Open up.
Okay,
Thank
go right
you, Mr.
ahead.
Chairman. Colleagues, thank you so much for hearing this item. I know it's a meaty agenda today and a lot we want to get accomplished before the year end. But this item is an exciting item. We talk about solutions to the homeless crisis facing our city. Just last week, Mr. Englander launched the Homeless Services application. We continue to advance our efforts on the Bridge Home. This is one piece of the solution that I feel, myself and Mr. Bloomfield, who happened to get his support on, is part of the solution to the homelessness crisis facing our city. I want to talk about an idea, and if I can, Mr. Chair, go into a quick deep dive into this. An idea that I had the intention to put hundreds of homeless people to work. This idea was meant to fill a gap on how we're approaching solutions to the homelessness issue facing our city. And as a city, clearly we're making progress locating sites for short-term and long-term housing. We've adopted a housing first, no wrong door approach that we're already seeing the effects of its success. We're also making big strides in expanding wraparound services and preemptive measures to prevent homelessness from happening in the first place. And tomorrow in Council, for example, we're voting on several items related to bridge housing sites spread across 4 council districts, as well as expanding our efforts with homeless youth and seniors and enhancing our winter shelter program. But there are 2 main things that get a person off the street and prevent them from falling back into homelessness. First, of course, is a place called home, and second, a job. Myself and Mr. Englander can attest to this. As officers, we hear when we're interacting with homeless individuals, we hear loud and clear, I need an opportunity. Chronically homeless individuals, mentally ill homeless folks who need services and help, they come to us and say, I need a job, I need help, I need to get back on my feet. I believe this is a good start to do just that, and even more so as a council member and going out to a number of these sites and encampments. That's what I hear constantly. And this is not just a job. A reliable job, a job that provides benefits, a job that's run by an organization that clearly has resources designed to combat homelessness and long track record of doing so. And if approved, this item before you, this will be the only major item before this body that will specifically address homeless employment. It will be the last piece to complete the puzzle of our city's comprehensive homeless strategy that Mr. Bond and I have talked about as well. So I want to take a minute to address some concerns and misconceptions that we've heard in our Public Works Gain Reduction Committee about the proposed pilot program. First, this will not take a job away from any existing city employee or contractors. It's an entirely new program that would provide job opportunities for the homeless and make our streets, sidewalks, and other public spaces cleaner. Next, this would not affect our targeted local hire goals. And as mentioned in the report before you, individuals who are placed in the proposed litter abatement pilot program would also be added to the pool of names for the targeted local hire program. And that program is currently operating on a lottery system. And if an individual's name is pulled from the targeted local hire, then that person would leave the litter abatement pilot for the TLH job. Now, we would, in fact, be increasing the pool of people eligible for the targeted local hire program with this litter abatement pilot. And isn't that what we want? Isn't that what we want to do to help those get back on their feet to self-sufficiency? And finally, the proposed one-year pilot program includes 36 full-time positions. However, it's important to note that estimated that the pilot program would employ a total of 200 to 300 homeless individuals. Individuals will cycle in and out of this pilot program over the course of a year. And from its conception, these jobs would be intended for only homeless individuals. In fact, I even left to see, as we're proposing these bridge home locations throughout the city, we have made a commitment and a promise that we will have a number of cleanups in and around the bridge home locations. Why not employ those individuals who are staying at the bridge home to be a part of a litter abatement program in and around these sites? So, colleagues, let's not lose sight of the proposed pilot program before you. We're here today to give hundreds of homeless individuals the opportunity to work, and there's no better homeless prevention tool than the dignity of a job and an honest day's work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and colleagues.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Buscaino. Mr. Poon, did you want to?
Sure. Wilson Poon with the CAO's office. Item 6, we have 3 CAO reports. As the council member pointed out, the first one, I'll be very brief here. The first one that was prepared back in May presents a framework for this pilot program. The idea was to have 6 cleanup crews. We'd contract through Chrysalis. Each crew assigned each of the 6 sanitation waste sheds, and they'd be deployed to areas of the city that, based on our clean stat data. The second report was prepared back in November, and this report provides some updates to the funding sources. When the May report was written, there was no funding identified in the mayor's proposed budget, but through the actions of your committee, $10 million was added in the UB for homeless-related services. We also explored the use of HEAP funds, and after talking to our homeless coordinator in our office, we found out some of those funds were oversubscribed, so we went back to the UB option. In addition, the November report talks about a change in having sanitation administer the contract. Initially, we proposed OCB, but we kind of thought that the agency that's using the services might be more efficient for them to also pay the invoices and administer the contract. The November report also touched on what the council member talked about, the TLH program, the concerns that are raised about that, as well as the high cost of the pilot program that Councilman Krikorian brought up in an earlier committee meeting. And then the last report that was released last week was an instruction report back from the Public Works and Gang Reduction Committee on two issues. The first issue was to do a cost-benefit analysis between having the program in OCB versus sanitation. And then the second report back was to meet with the unions and kind of talk about some of the issues and concerns they had with the pilot program. So we met with OCB the following day, and they provided us with the proposed budget for how they would implement the program. They identified close to $1 million in savings. We didn't really get a chance to vet the numbers, but we did express some concerns on the feasibility of those savings. We also have some concerns about the modifications to Chrysalis's employment model and the impact on the effectiveness to assist homeless individuals. And then the second part, like I mentioned, we met with the unions, and I have staff from our Employee Relations Division that can also brief you on that. There's also staff from Chrysalis here and Sanitation, OCB, and who are available to answer any questions you may have.
Very good. Thank you. Members, questions? Mr. Kretz.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is a question for the CAO or a question for Mr. Buscaino, but obviously it's better to get some income than nothing, but I assume this would be a low enough pay that one couldn't possibly pay for their housing using these funds. So how do they actually transition into society with these new jobs, or how helpful will they be in actually assisting the folks that are currently homeless, and if they are homeless would probably remain homeless with this small amount of funding?
Yeah, I think Chrysalis could probably address that question.
As they're coming up, Mr. Kretz, this again gives an individual who is chronically homeless an opportunity to, one, earn some dollars and potentially set aside some funds with hopes of creating a pipeline toward self-sufficiency. And maybe we can have Chrysalis also address that as well.
So Trevor Kale from Chrysalis. The transitional job opportunity would be like that very first step in that very first job. We call it a pathway to self-sufficiency because it's really that first time that you have maybe worked in years, decades for some of these folks. So it's less about the pay. The pay is there and the pay is nice and the pay is important, but it's really about the dignity that you receive from having a job, having a place to go every day, learning how to speak when your supervisor speaks to you, how to take that feedback and put you on a pathway. A big part of this program, the funding for it, is for our supportive services as well. So while they're working in our program, they've got a dedicated employment specialist or case manager who works with them one-on-one to build what will be a longer-term pathway into a career, more so than just this transitional job that we hope only lasts 3 to 6 months for an individual.
Have we thought about how to make sure if there are folks that have alcohol and drug abuse problems that we're not just funding their habit, but that we actually make sure they can put savings into a bank account and start to move in the right direction?
So a big component of our program is that men and women are clean and sober for at least 30 days when they engage. We also, by using supervisors who are from the population, they're very in touch with our workers and are quick to identify if there's a substance abuse problem. We're quick to get them in, get them attached to services really quickly so that we can keep them on that successful pathway.
And Mr. Buscaino, the other question is, I know there was some concern expressed by our City Hall unions. Have you worked with them and figured out, I haven't heard from them directly, so have you worked with them and figured out the problems?
Yeah, we heard that expressed some frustrations not meeting with the CAO because it was a meet and confer issue, but we've heard loud and clear from the CAO, this is not a meet and confer issue. This is not taking anyone's job away. This is not taking away an existing job. But it's like, Mr. Kretz, we hear folks who want to get in the way of progress in solving the homelessness crisis in our city. We hear from those NIMBYs who don't want a emergency housing site in their backyard. To me, this is no different. You know, we value the work our men and women of the city family does each and every day. This is, again, not going to take away one single job. Let's just give these folks who need the most help, the most vulnerable, a chance. And let's get them back on their feet.
I don't necessarily disagree with you. I'm just curious if you ever actually had meetings with the City Hall unions and worked it out, or if you didn't hear from them, what's
We have heard from them. Staff has met with them. And we continue to share with our brothers and sisters in labor force. Again, we have no intentions of taking anyone's job away, just trying to give someone an opportunity to get back on his or her feet.
Okay. Mr. Bonner?
It's a pilot program, right?
Yeah, just look at this as an internship program.
Well, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
I think it's a great idea. I'm a little annoyed I didn't think of it first. So I'm all in favor.
Mr. Bloomfield?
Thank you. You were mentioning in terms of the OCB, there were modifications on that model to the Chrysalis case management model, what were you referring to? And because that raises a red flag with me, because they have a very successful model, and I want to make sure that we're not endangering it.
Well, one of the savings that was identified was the supervisor, and as Trevor just mentioned, that supervisor-subordinate ratio, that interaction is very critical to their employment model. So with the OCB model, they proposed that they absorb the supervisory duties within their existing workforce. OCB, they contract with those nonprofits, so that those six supervisory positions who are graduates of the Chrysalis program would be substituted with OCB contractors.
But isn't Chrysalis an OCB contractor?
No.
No? They're not one of the 6 or 8?
No, we don't have any current.
Okay, well, that's a concern in terms of that model. I want to see as many savings as we can, but I also want to make sure that, this program is the trash pickup is kind of a side piece to it. It really is a homelessness issue. It's giving people a chance to experience, the most basic work opportunity out there. It's different than our local hire, where we're trying to get people into our job system, and they're folks who are ready to take on a job. These are folks who, as you said, they may not have worked for a decade, and we're trying to give them a couple of months of something steady and a little bit of pay. It's a little bit more than, Mitch and I were just talking about a different program, a Clean Streets program, which is very active in the Valley, which is fantastic. Similar idea, but they give gift cards to folks, and it's completely independent, and it's a lot very cost effective. And I see this as a little bit more than that in terms of, because you're actually giving someone a job for several months, and it's a little bit more, but it's not actually the entree into our city jobs program, unless they're lucky enough to get into the targeted local hire, and then that's where we want to bring as many people as we can into our city jobs, which is the goal here. In terms of partnerships and where this would happen, will there be partnerships in the SPA 2 area up in the West Valley in this kind of pilot program? I know you mentioned it's based on clean stats, but how do we determine where it would go?
Yeah, so sanitation would be the ones to deploy the resources. They manage the clean stat data, as well as, I think Lisa saw. And they take input from council offices as well, and 311 requests. So it's kind of prioritizing how we're deploying our resources, right? So that could be an area. I can't speak for the Bureau or the department.
I guess I want to put it out there, and I mean, obviously I'm a co-presenter. I'm extremely supportive of this idea, but I do want to make sure, it is a homeless problem. We have homelessness throughout the city, and piloting something like this, I think a good pilot will test it in various areas of the city. And so I'm just putting that out there, that I do want to see this as, if we do it, that it's not just limited to one area, where the most trash may be, according to the Clean Streets, but it's actually looking at it of how does this model work with the different homeless populations, because the homeless populations are also a little different in different parts of the city, and I think it's worth exploring out there. So I just wanted to put that out there. Is there any training required before individuals perform the work under this?
Yeah, so part of Chrysalis programming is a kind of extensive job readiness training. They'll receive north of 20 hours of one-on-one or group work with us as an organization before they would be placed in this program even. So just as a Chrysalis client, you get that level of service provision. And then once you are, we're employing you, then you go through an orientation, safety training, before you're hired in place, so that you're at about 25 hours at that point of interaction with us before they've even gone to work. Once they are at work, they get daily briefings, safety briefings, as well as connections back to the program for job searches once they are working, so they're continually touched.
And that's all obviously baked into the cost of all this. I mention that because it's important to realize when we're looking at the cost effectiveness of this, we're obviously not looking at the amount of litter cleaned up, and we look at that, but that's not the metric that really matters on a program like this. The metric that matters is, are we getting people,
human capital,
into society and ready to be able to apply for jobs and look for jobs and that kind I think that's it. Great. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Englander? Okay. Let me go ahead and hear from our public speakers before I offer my thoughts. So the remaining folks who are here that wish to speak are Simboa Wright and Molly Rhodes. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Simboa Wright, representative Coalition of LA City Unions, city employee. I just want to tell you about one person that went through a program similar to the Targeted Local Hiring Vocational Worker Program. He's retired, but this guy went through Chrysalis, was homeless in his vehicle. He was able to come in as a maintenance assistant, become a maintenance laborer, promote to wastewater worker 1, worker 2, did acting as a supervisor, and finally, after 16 years of service, retired with dignity. He has a home. He has his own home. He has a vehicle. It wasn't just a, hey, we're going to give you a little bit of job here and a little bit of job there, but they gave him a career. That's what we're asking. Don't just say, hey, here's some change. And we're not saying don't work with Chrysalis, don't work with the homeless, but we're saying give these people a career, something they can get a home. This guy was on drugs. He's not on drugs anymore. That's what we're saying.
Thank you.
Hi. So we've talked about this with the Public Works Board a number of times, and the coalition is fully supportive of the notion of transitional work for homeless people. We're so committed to that we built it into the Targeted Local Hire program, which when you look at the most recent numbers shows that 25% of folks coming into TLH are homeless. So I would dispute the assertion that you all haven't done anything yet about homelessness and hiring, because you have with us. What we would be able to support is some kind of working together going forward. But this contract is a problem for us. The word litter appears in the maintenance laborer job description. That's a civil service document. It's our work. And so we could not support what is currently in front of you. But we want to work. The Targeted Local Hire Committee never got to talk about this. It never came to it. So.
Okay. Thank you very much. So, first of all, the concept involved in this motion is one that I love. It takes a step beyond a similar pilot program that I've actually already initiated with Chrysalis through LA Rise, in which there's unified case management between housing and job preparation. And it's been very effective, and Chrysalis has been a terrific partner. And the reason I'm a little ambivalent on sort of the cost and mission of this is, and I think a number of members touched upon it, this is something more than what the programs that you were talking about, Mr. Blumenfield. Something more than that, because it includes wraparound services and some other things. And yet it's something a little less than targeted local hire as well, because these are for folks who aren't probably ready even to begin the journey towards career preparation. So it's a little bit of a hybrid between those two things. And I'm not sure yet how that reflects in the cost effectiveness rather, or the sources of potential funding for it. So I like the concept. I still continue to be concerned about the price tag for it, and whether, particularly because this is it's a no bid kind of situation that Chrysalis is entering into. It is a pilot program. I get it, but I'd like to see whether there's some way that we can meet the needs without having such a significant budgetary impact. So what I would suggest is a couple of things. First, the CAO is going to be reporting back on the unappropriated balance and the HEAP funding and how what availability there is for those programs to be spent on this. So I'd like, when that report comes back, I'd like that to include appropriate recommendations for potential funding for this program, since that is what we had talked about as the source for this. So I'd like to hear those recommendations from the CAO back. I'd like to continue this matter until January, when we can consider that CAO report as well. And in the meantime, I'd also like to ask the CAO to report on whether LAHSA can provide funding and program management services relating to this program as well, because there are, I think there are potential funding sources that might be available there that we haven't yet brought to the fore. And then lastly, I'd like the CAO's recommendations on what procurement options there, I don't want to say procurement, but what other options there may be as we, maybe in addition to this pilot program for the longer term, to assess a range of providers that might be able to work with the city in delivering these services, and what their potential relative costs might be, and whether there might be efficiencies that might be realized by utilizing the OCB contractors or other homeless service providers, or some combination of those things. So I'd like to continue, hold it in committee until January, and then get those reports back. Mr. Englander.
Thank you. A couple things. So about 2 years ago, we initiated a pilot using beautification grants, where we often, all of us get beautification grants for cleaning up streets, planting trees, restoring murals. And my office had an idea, actually, that rather than do that, why don't we use that same money to actually hire folks who are living on the street, hire some of the homeless to clean up the community, to pick up, I can't use the word litter, I guess, rubbish. We can. Litter's not the word, I guess, we're allowed to use, according to Molly. But to actually go out there and work. And so we put a group of folks together, and we got some other sponsors, some grocery stores to issue vouchers for food. We brought in some wraparound services to work with some of these individuals, and that pilot actually turned into its own independent nonprofit, Clean Streets, Clean Starts. They then went to all the neighborhood councils, not just in my district, and got money from almost all of them. They went into Bob's, they went into Nuri's, into Monica's, and now they're about halfway through the valley, working with many neighborhood councils and other, and they've got a lot of corporate sponsors as well, funding them, where they get together and literally hire people off the street every single day. And many of the same people, get them into housing, they're tracking it all, getting them substance abuse, because many of them have drugs and alcohol issues. This is that plus, right, is what I'm hearing. And I also understand, well, this is my last meeting officially. This is probably one of the most important issues. It is the most important issue of our lifetime. That we need to try everything we can. That we should leave no stone unturned. It's in every neighborhood, and it's an epidemic. And many of these folks who are living on the street, these people who are on the street, have severe problems beyond financial. And what we have found through working with them, it's really not, I know you all said it already, it's not a job per se. It's the ability to have some structure in their life. It's the ability to have some socialization in their life. It's the ability to see that there's hope or faith to get them off the street. That leads to those opportunities. And we know it's working because we've measured it in Clean Streets and Clean Starts. With that, I would very much support a pilot. I'd make a suggestion that if in a pilot like this, trying to take on citywide is too much, too fast, because it's so complicated. That if you've found a partner organization, and Chrysalis has a phenomenal reputation, that you move forward right away with them, that you carve out a couple areas in your own district to show proof of concept, to show the deliverables, to then expand it. And it takes away all the other complications and report backs where it's truly just a pilot. And maybe it's in a couple of small areas, whether it's in CD15 coupled with CD3, whatever that might be, to not wait until March or April or because that's realistically what's going to happen. I've been around here a long time. And I think only for the good of also protecting the city from litigation, from making sure that every point every member, including the chair, made was very, very real because it's very complicated. Making sure the contracts are ironed out correctly, making sure we're not interfering with MOUs, making sure that all of those things make perfect sense. That's our responsibility. But I think there's also another way to go about it to get it off the ground fast because we need help right away. So it's not a motion, it's not a suggestion, it's just a conversation that I think should occur right away. And maybe it's with some of the members on this committee in coming back and trying to launch it right away, but just do it in a different way so it's not bogged down in bureaucracy, because I think it's a great idea. Just my 2 cents.
They're good 2 cents because you're right about the inevitable delay that comes from bureaucracy, for sure. And, Clean Streets, Clean Start's a good example of getting around that and getting stuff done. That being said, I think that's Mr. Buscaino's goal with this as well, is to advance this as quickly as possible and to try to get around some of the bureaucratic hurdles. The only issue, the reason that cost keeps coming up for me is we are moving forward with targeted local hire now, for example, and we can't find enough positions to put those people into. And so for a couple of $1 million, for $5 million, for whatever, to create new positions, it opens up the tip of the funnel, which allows more to flow through. And just by way of example, may or may not be more cost effective, affects a different audience, but I do think that that's one of the reasons that I'm not saying that should supplant this, because this does serve a different function, but I do think it does. We should consider the potential funding sources for that compared to the UB. So I do want to see whether there is availability of the HEAP funding. I do want to see whether there's availability of LASA funding that can do this. And so what's that? Oh, okay. So is there any objection to continuing it until January to get those reports? Okay. First meeting back, Mr. Buscaino, I promise. First meeting back in January. so if there's no objection, that will be the action of the committee. All right? Thank you very much. Okay. All right, that brings us to item number 7.
Item number 7 is the Los Angeles Department of Transportation reports relative to a proposed pilot program that would return a portion of the local meter revenue to the locations where it was generated for transportation improvements and repealing the Special Parking Revenue Fund and replacing it with the Parking Enterprise Fund pursuant to motion Bond and Rue. On May 23, 2018, the Transportation Committee approved this matter.
All right. Good afternoon. Thanks for your patience.
Good afternoon. Ken Husting with LADOT, and I'm joined by Josie Valdez from LADOT Parking Management. So we're here to propose, to have a report that's proposing to create a special parking revenue fund pilot program that returns a portion of the local revenue back to the community where it was generated to improve the quality of life within the community through parking and transportation projects. So we brought a concept over to Transportation Committee, and with the guidance of Transportation Committee, we settled on a few items that I'd like to highlight. First, the recipient organization would be a business improvement district. And the reason for that is we need to have a fiscally auditable and responsible organization that we can trust with the money. And also the bids are monitored by the city, and they share a common goal to improve the quality of life for the area that they represent. Next were the pilot locations. 3 locations were identified, and this is based on differing economic data. One of them is Lincoln Heights, another one is Westwood Village, and the last one is Pacific Palisades. Each of those have different demographics and bring in different amounts of income. And also was revenue sharing. We're looking at trying to figure out what was the proper balance of how much money should be shared with these business improvement districts. And so the recommendation was to have a 15%, so that provides a good base level as well as puts a cap on not going too extreme, and also provides a minimum of $50,000 for a business improvement district to work with. So in other words, it's enough money that they can actually do something significant to the community. The last one was distribution. And so it was a question of, should the money stay with the city? Should it be given away up front? And so what was decided was to use the money for city services, or if it couldn't be done by a city service, to do it on a reimbursement basis. And so also attached to the report are rules and procedures with the application process, eligibility requirements, and also administrative oversight. And finally, what we're looking to do as part of the pilot program is really see, is the money being spent? Is the program easy enough and that the community is seeing the benefits? What type of projects are proposed or being implemented, and do they benefit the public and transportation and parking? And then also the ancillary benefit to this is that as the community start to see the benefit of being able to have the local return go back to the area, the ancillary benefit is it incentivizes more parking meters to be going to the area, which obviously helps us be able to manage better the parking demand. And so depending on how the pilot program goes, assuming it goes well, there's an opportunity to expand it to more bids or possibly take it to different organizations that are financially auditable. And so with that, we'll be happy to take any questions you may have.
Great, thank you. The only issue that comes to my mind with this is the relationship with the bids. And specifically, you mentioned whether the revenues would be providing city services, whether there would it be on a reimbursement basis and so on. But of course, a bid is supposed to not be spending its money on things that are for the general benefit, except for a small percentage of it, because otherwise it's contradictory to the relationship between the bid and the city. So my concern is that. I mean, how does this use of what would otherwise be city parking related funds with the bid, what are the legal concerns that we may have about that, potential liability for how the money is spent, how the bid determines how the money is spent, and then if it's going to be spent on capital investment, what's the ownership of that capital investment? Is it owned by the bid or the city? Is it maintained by the bid or by the city? So I'm trying to get my head around those issues, and maybe you can help walk me through that.
Sure, I'll start with the latter. So when any project that is created through the money, this is city money, is owned by the city.
Okay.
And so if there's a capital improvement and it does require maintenance, the bids are required to submit a maintenance plan that will be reviewed by the city. And so say, for instance, depending on the type of project, whether it's wayfinding, if it's a landscape median island, this needs to be reviewed by the different departments to see, okay, is this a sustainable plan, or is this something that they feel is going to be built and it may just cause a burden for the city to move forward. So we do plan on, with every request that comes to the department, whether it's something that's in Public Works, if it's something that is within DOT or another agency, they will be reviewing that proposal to see, okay, is this something that we could stand behind, or is this a non-starter that has just, flagged with different issues? So that's one thing that we have built into the contract, and we do want to try out with the pilot. As far as the concern of bids having a different role they're not supposed to be spending for the general public, we did speak with the city attorney, and the city attorney did assure us that, at least he didn't raise that concern, we will be entering into a separate agreement with the Business Improvement District with the specific guidelines, with the standard provisions that will allow the bid, at least we believe, for a pilot program to be able to carry out the intent. And as part of the program, we do expect to have a number of outreach. So even before they can actually approach the city with their application, they have to show that they did outreach to the community, and they're looking to get the community input on how to be able to implement those projects.
So I guess, put another way, as I'm understanding it, the SPRF money, which is general benefit parking money,
yes,
is being used for, would be used for the general benefit of the parking public, but it would be used in a way that would be prioritized and administered by the bid.
So the bid would be able to working with the community, say that we believe these are what's needed in the area, but then the city has the ultimate approval. So we can say, you know what, we disagree. And obviously, we'll be working very closely with the council office. Anything that's proposed, we do not want to make sure is against any future plans of what the city intends to do. So I think, especially during the course of the pilot program, we're going to be extremely cautious of whatever is being proposed.
Okay.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Christy Numano here at City Attorney's Office. And I guess my understanding of this program, maybe I'm not like really understanding it, because when I did discuss this with Matt Hale, our understanding was that the money was going to go directly to the bid to be used as part of the assessment district. And if that was the case, then we would have concerns about that, because that's when you have to worry about the assessment district funds, whether it's the special benefit or the contributed general benefit fund, not being used to supplant city services. And in this case, because of the type of improvements that they're looking at, it would be supplanting. But it sounds to me like you're saying that you are going to be entering into separate contracts with the bids to perform these services, so it would actually be a totally separate budget.
Right.
Yes.
So in which case, then there wouldn't be that issue.
And that's where I came down on it too, because if it were bid money that was being used for the general benefit, that would be a problem. This is not bid money in the first place, so it's new. It's not even revenue to them. It's revenue that's being set aside for them to help direct.
Right.
As a matter of fact, even in the rules, we do have something that specifically says it's not to supplant, it's to supplement.
Okay. So you don't have a concern?
No.
Because I think that absolved my
Correct.
concern,
Yes,
or resolved my concern. So, okay, good. Mr. Blumenfield.
On the same lines, I mean, I was in the same mindset. So it's not really giving this money to the bids at all. It's basically just establishing that this percentage of those revenues are going to geographically be in this area, and then the city is basically contracting, in this case, with the bid to accomplish one thing or another.
Yeah, we needed.
I mean, you don't need a bid for that. You could do it in an area that doesn't have a bid.
Yes.
Right? I mean, so bid is almost an irrelevant piece to this puzzle, right?
So the reason we selected a bid is because we needed first who was out there and who was financially auditable. So we can't just give this to any kind of organization that just pops up, even though in the future we may be able to open it up to nonprofits that have been established, and many nonprofits have been very successful doing something like this. So we thought, just for the sake of the pilot program, we'll start off with a bid because they're known quantities.
It could conceivably be a neighborhood council or any number of other different things. Yeah.
What we're actually piloting is the idea of taking a 15% share of the meters and allocating it to specific projects in that area.
So it's 15% that is within that particular community. So it's not 15% of that Sparrow thing.
No, I get it. I mean, it's 15% of the revenues from that local geography.
Yes. And it's just on the on-street meters, not anything off-street.
Okay. Mr. Kretz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I haven't had this conversation with the Westwood bid, but since Westwood historically, the more successful they are, the more trouble they have because then they don't have adequate parking. I assume they would use all this money for parking because that's the primary function that the bid performs, is trying to deal with the most pressing issues, and that is the most pressing issue there. But do they have the ability to spend it on other things? Just out of curiosity, not that it would necessarily be that relevant in this case.
Yes, actually, and as a matter of fact, the Westwood bid is here, so he might be able to answer your question directly. As far as the eligibility, we broadened it then more than just strictly parking. We looked at mobility and transportation, because we realized one of the main goals of LA Express Park is about encouraging different modes of transportation to help free up parking availability. And so we look at it as transportation as the whole ecosystem. So it's going to be broader than just strictly parking. It could be bikes, it could be peds, it could be transit, but it has to be transportation related that has an indirect or direct benefit to parking.
Perfect.
Mr. Mona?
I'm good.
Okay. Anything else, members?
I don't have a single parking meter in my district.
All right.
Right.
Move that we start installing parking meters in Council District 12.
And by the way, it's not an indication that no one wants to go to the 12th district. I just for the record, I'm sure that's not the reason.
They want to stay longer. Or representatives. Actually, they just want to stay longer, and so they don't have to pay to park.
They may want meters after this.
All right. If there's nothing further, we'll go ahead and approve the recommendations.
Great.
So
Thank you very
there's
much.
no objection. Thank you. Okay. So that brings us to item number 8.
Item number 8 is a
Mr. Chair.
motion, Harris Dawson Wesson, relative to resolution positions for the Department of Public Works Bureau of Street Services as part of the Metro Crenshaw LAX Transit Corridor project to repair and or replace sidewalks and curbs on Crenshaw Boulevard between Exposition Boulevard and 67th Street.
Good afternoon, Stephanie Clements, Bureau of Street Services. I have Audrey Netzawong here with me, also from Bureau of Street Services. In front of you today is a motion to approve funding and position authority for sidewalk repair work to repair and replace sidewalk and curbs on Crenshaw Boulevard between Exposition and 67th Street. The project budget is $7.5 million. The Board of Public Works and Metro have approved this project, and an MOU has been executed. Here to answer any questions you may have.
Okay. First of all, I guess my first question is, we're authorizing a lot of new positions, and I'm not sure why that is, particularly if Metro has contractors on site, and this is a question of sharing the cost of doing this work. Why are we not just realizing the efficiency of having Metro's contractors complete this work and then reimbursing them for part of the cost?
Do you want to take that, or do you want me? Adele can join us, but my understanding, a decision was made months ago that it made the most economical sense in terms of the schedule, in terms of possible issues with the scope, that it made the most sense for city crews to perform the work.
Because if, the past is any indicator, this project is supposed to be done by September of next year, and hiring up 53 new positions is not likely to result in the work getting done by September of next year, frankly. So that's problem number one. And I'm not sure, this project was delayed by 6 months. The Metro's completion was already delayed by 6 months, but the street closures are supposed to still be on schedule, the relief from the street closures. But I don't know how this figures into the new Metro timeline of that, whether September of next year still is the timeline that we're shooting for, and if so, how are we going to hire up 53 new positions and get that work done by then?
Councilman Adel Hashkhalil, Director of City Services. When I looked at this, actually one of the biggest concern is hiring and how we move forward. But just talking to Metro, we had actually a meeting with Metro last Friday to review some of the issues. And the biggest issue to have on this project is the inability to work with the existing contractor to deliver on some of the work. And the concern is they already have a huge number of backlog and punch list and issues that they cannot deliver on. And the feeling is the best way to get this done, because to address the need of the community to open the streets up and get things back to normal, is to have us perform the work. And really they see us as the savior of them, because really adding some more scope to the contractor will become a huge issue, because there's actually some issues right now, contractual issues, that being dealt with the contractor, with Metro, with engineering. So I think this will be a good win-win. The only thing is just, we need to move in, and we've shown ability to deliver, and how we're going to be able to really fill these positions. I think we have some of the exams already underway and the hiring underway for many of these lists to cover our vacancies that we have, right?
Correct. Some of these did not have lists, and now they do have lists. In addition to that, personnel has been authorized to hire 5 additional staff to help supplement and to help expedite our hiring process, which is starting to help. We're also engaged in a group of mass hirings for some of these very common classifications that we use a lot, like equipment operator. We're in the process of trying to hire up about 40 or so of equipment operators. So we're trying to identify opportunities where we can collapse the Crenshaw hiring into existing hirings that we're working on right now.
Okay, so maybe it was not clear from the actual language of the motion then. The proposal is to appropriate funding and approve the hiring into existing vacant positions or creating new resolution authorities?
We would create new resolution authority positions, and when the project was completed in about 12 months, those positions would absorb back into our existing operations, and these actual authorities would go away. Like I mentioned,
Why aren't you
these
just
are
hiring into the vacant positions?
well, because those vacant positions are earmarked for other projects, such as Complete Streets, such as Vision Zero Concrete Crew. So those positions are already earmarked, and we're trying to hire for those vacancies also.
But that's kind of that's where I'm having trouble with this, because if we're not filling those vacant positions, it seems I'm struggling to understand when we're not yet filling our existing vacant positions, why we're creating new resolution authorities to do this specific work when there's work that we have throughout the city that's not getting done because there's vacancies that aren't being filled.
Just to be accurate, Mr. Chair, a lot of the work is being done using overtime too. Because of these vacancies not being done, we are actually really using a lot of overtime to meet these mandates and requirements that we have to complete. So I agree with you that the hiring is a priority, which I think is a huge priority for me when I came in. And I'm working very hard on getting these exams, these lists to be hired. We believe because a lot of these positions are actually ones that we're hiring on right now, finally.
Right.
We think we can add and hire more to really meet the needs that we have today and cut down on the overtime use and then address this need. One of the questions I asked is the issue, and I think we will talk about it, is once the job is done, what happens to the positions that are hired? With the attrition that we have and the amount of attrition that we have, we should be able, with no problem, absorb these positions without keeping the positions in place. The actual individuals be absorbed in our budget, our authorities.
Okay. All right. Members, questions? Anything else? All right. Then if there's no objection, it will be the action of the committee to go ahead and approve the recommendations. Thank you very much.
Pardon me, Mr. Chair. Andrew Choi, Office of the City Clerk. For the record, for item number 5, would the committee like to concur with the Economic Development Committee?
On item number 5?
Yes, as the request for from the CLA would be before the council takes action on this item.
You lost me there.
Councilmember Bonin's request is that the CLA speak with him prior to Wednesday. This report will be issued on Wednesday. So would you like to concur?
Mr. Bonin, can we take your request as an informal request then to the CLA and just assume that they'll go ahead and comply with your request? Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. But so
additionally, for item number 7, with the
Sharon will follow through.
For item number 7, would the committee like to concur with the Transportation Committee?
Yeah, you know, whenever I have a chance to concur with the Transportation Committee, I always try to do that. So we'll go ahead.
Thank you.
Go ahead and do that. Thank you.
But you did concur with
Yes, yes, we did. Okay, so I think that brings it. We did just approve item number 8, right? Okay, good. So then that brings us then to our closed session items. So you know what? I'm sorry, Mr. Previn, you want to take your general public comment before we go into closed session? As a courtesy to you, let's go ahead and do that before. Do we even have our lawyers here anymore, or did they? Okay, good.
Well, Koretz is no longer present, for the record. I guess he had to go. You know, the campaign finance that impacts so many of these decisions, because there's a lot of fundraising in City Hall. And, you know, Mitch Englander raised $400,000, Blumenfield raised over 200, you raised 100 and something, Bonin raised almost 500,000. Englander just walked out of the room. But we're changing the campaign finance ordinance early in the morning with Herb West and Marquise Harris-Dawson. Weezar stepped off. because he had a little, they fleeced him of his committee assignments. And what's underfoot is a real expanding of the hose into the $20 million of public matching fund that all of you guys are going to benefit from, which is why I asked Bonin and Koretz, and I've even asked Blumenfield, who's a reasonable man, to come to Studio City to tell our constituents how this is a good thing and how it works. And yet, instead, we got kind of a harsh response, which is pedal to the metal, let's move forward, shut these people up. It's totally inappropriate, and it will never stand. So I ask you to continue that item until the crazy special election put on the map by Mitchell Englander, who will be the sole beneficiary of all the public money for it, can be resolved, okay? It's really, really bad,
thank
and
you.
we will notify other authorities.
Thank you, Mr.
It's
President.
out of control.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so we're ready to go into. All right, we are back in open session, and there being no other business before the committee other than to bid Mr. Englander a fond farewell from the Budget and Finance Committee and thank him for his many years of diligent work on behalf of the taxpayers of Los Angeles. We are adjourned.